Cut, Bruce, that's the third time you've missed the cue. The room went silent. Bruce Willis stood in the middle of the set, his jaw slightly clenched, the lights too bright in his eyes. He blinked, disoriented, as if the words had slipped through a crack in his mind again. A low murmur passed between the younger crew members. Someone chuckled. Another rolled his eyes. He turned toward the director, a soft confusion in his gaze. Where were we again? A production assistant standing by the monitor let out a breathy laugh. He can't even remember his own name at this point, she whispered, not quietly enough. The script supervisor smirked. Bruce didn't respond. He just looked down, rubbing his hands together like he was trying to find warmth in a cold room that didn't exist. He didn't yell, didn't argue. He just waited. What they didn't see, what none of them had taken the time to learn, was that Bruce had been fighting something invisible for months now. But on that set, with the cameras stopped and the air thick with impatience, all they saw was a man who had lost his edge. "Let's take 5, the director said, already irritated. "Somebody get him a coffee, or something." Bruce wandered off the set slowly, shoulders slightly hunched. He passed by a group of grips who quickly looked away, suddenly busy with coiling cables. One of them muttered under his breath, "Should have retired with Die Hard 3, man." He sat in a folding chair near the edge of the soundstage. A young intern approached him with a bottle of water. "You okay, Mr. Willis?" He looked at her with a weak smile, trying to be polite. "Yeah, just a little tired, sweetheart." She nodded awkwardly and walked away, visibly unsure of what to say next. Somewhere nearby, a sound guy adjusted his boom mic and said to his colleague, "He was a legend, now he's just holding us back." Those words hung in the air longer than the others. It wasn't the first time Bruce had heard them, or something like them. These days, whispers followed him like shadows. On set, in the trailers, behind closed doors, people talked as if he wasn't really there. As if the man who had once commanded the screen was now just a burden. What they didn't understand, what he hadn't yet told most of them, was that something inside his brain was changing. Words came slower, names slipped, sentences drifted. He was still Bruce Willis, still the man who had bled on glass for Die Hard, who had made millions laugh, cry, and hold their breath. But his mind wasn't his ally anymore, and yet he kept showing up. Because legends don't quit, they fade with dignity. Back on set, the director barked, "Everyone in position," and the crew scrambled. Bruce stood up and made his way back to his mark. Someone had taped it in bright yellow for him this time, a quiet pity. The camera rolled. He tried again. Line after line, he fought through the haze. And for a moment, just a flicker, the old Bruce Willis came back. His eyes lit up, the delivery sharp, his posture firm. The room was still. When the scene ended, there was silence. Not applause, just quiet. As if no one quite knew how to feel. "Maybe there's still something left in him," the director muttered, almost surprised. There was, but time was short. What they didn't know yet was that everything they mocked him for and they'd soon regret, because they weren't just forgetting an actor, they were forgetting a man who had once carried Hollywood on his back and was now carrying something far heavier alone. If you felt the weight of this moment, consider subscribing and leaving a comment. Your voice matters, just like Bruce's still does. The following day, Bruce arrived earlier than expected. He wore the same worn leather jacket he'd worn on countless sets before, hands deep in his pockets, eyes focused but distant. The makeup artist greeted him with a forced cheerfulness, offering a warm smile and patting the chair. "Morning, Bruce, you're early." "Didn't sleep much," he said, settling in as she dabbed lightly around his temples. "Hard to quiet the noise, you know." She paused, uncertain how to respond. "Yeah," she finally said, "I get that." Behind the partition, two assistant producers huddled around a tablet. One of them, a wiry man with too much gel in his hair, lowered his voice. "Listen, the investors are asking questions. This is the third time this week we've had to reshoot because he forgot a line." "Yeah," the other replied. "But what are we going to do, fire Bruce Willis? That'll look worse than pushing through." They both glanced over as Bruce stepped out of makeup. His shoulders slumped, but his presence still held a strange gravity. like a fading lighthouse that had once guided entire fleets. The director approached him with a clipboard, trying to smile. "Hey Bruce, just a quick change in the script for scene 17. We trimmed a couple lines, nothing major." Bruce looked at the page, then back at the director. "You cut my dialogue?" "Just to help with the pace," the director said quickly. "Less to memorize." Bruce nodded slowly, but the disappointment didn't hide well in his eyes. He wasn't stupid. They were minimizing him, editing him out, line by line. In the soundstage, the energy shifted. Crew members moved more efficiently when Bruce wasn't around. Jokes returned. Conversations flowed. A young actor on set leaned into another during a lighting delay. "It's weird, right? Watching him struggle. I grew up on his movies." The other shrugged. "It's like watching your dad get old. You know it's coming, but you're never ready." Nearby, Bruce stood quietly with his back turned, holding his marked-up script like it was a lifeline. He could hear every word. During lunch, he sat alone under a canopy, poking at cold pasta. A veteran crew member, Greg, the key grip, walked over and sat across from him without asking. Greg had worked on 3 films with Bruce over the years. He looked tired, but solid, the kind of guy who'd seen everything in the business and kept his mouth shut. "You good?" Greg asked. Bruce gave a half smile. "Just the usual, trying to keep up." Greg leaned back in his chair, eyes squinting against the sun. "They don't get it, these kids. They think it's all about the next big thing. They weren't there when you carried whole productions on your back." Bruce didn't say anything at first, just nodded slowly. "It's not their fault. They don't know." Greg leaned forward. "Maybe, but you deserve more than this. The whispers, the way they look at you." Bruce looked up. "You think they'll ever remember who I was?" Greg gave a low, dry chuckle. "They'll remember. Might just take losing you to figure it out." That afternoon, as cameras rolled again, Bruce hit his marks better. Still slower, still straining, but sharper. There were no jokes this time, no whispers. He delivered a key monologue in a single take, one long, aching piece of dialogue that mirrored real life more than any of them realized. About a man being forgotten. About legacy. About not knowing how much time is left. When he finished, the silence felt heavier than applause. And this time, it wasn't confusion that filled the room. It was respect. 2 weeks later, Bruce didn't show up to set. At first, no one panicked. Traffic, maybe. A personal errand. The assistant director shuffled the schedule, bumping up other scenes. But by noon, the production office phone rang. It was Emma Willis, Bruce's wife. She spoke with the producer behind closed doors. When he emerged, his face was pale, eyes wide with something that looked like shame. "He's stepping away," he announced. A ripple moved through the crew like a silent wave. The young actress who had shared scenes with Bruce put down her water bottle, stunned. Someone from props just stared at the ground. "Is he sick?" someone asked. The producer hesitated. "It's not public yet, but yes, it's bad." The truth came out days later in a statement released by his family. Bruce had been diagnosed with frontotemporal dementia. The words hit harder than anyone expected. The condition explained everything. The lost lines, the blank stares, the forgotten directions. It wasn't age. It wasn't ego. It was illness. The film paused production indefinitely, and suddenly all the jokes, the eye rolls, the whispered comments, they echoed back with guilt. Crew members reread their text messages, remembering what they said behind his back. "He's a has-been. Total liability. He should just quit already." Now those same people were emailing apologies to the production office. Quiet, desperate attempts to erase what had been said in arrogance. At a cafe near the studio lot, 2 grips sat in silence. One finally said, "I remember when he did that hallway scene in Unbreakable. That stare. You couldn't look away." "Yeah," the other replied, "and now we treated him like a joke." They sat there for a long time, nursing coffee that had gone cold. The director, once so quick to cut Bruce's lines, now found himself defending his performance to the press. "Bruce showed up every single day. He gave us what he had, even when it cost him. Most actors would have walked away long before. The industry began to shift. Old co-stars started posting tributes on social media, scenes they had shared, moments of laughter, stories of how Bruce always remembered everyone's name on set, how he made people feel seen, valued. The narrative flipped from washed up to warrior. A week after the diagnosis went public, a private screening was held at a small theater in Burbank. The cast and crew were invited to watch the unfinished film. Bruce arrived with Emma, walking slowly but standing tall. He wore sunglasses and a quiet smile. When the lights dimmed and the first scene played, something remarkable happened. In that dark room, the legend returned. Line by line, gesture by gesture, Bruce's performance pulsed with vulnerability, with a gravity only earned through real struggle. The man who had once played indestructible characters now revealed what true strength looked like. Not invincibility, but showing up broken and giving everything anyway. When the credits rolled, the theater stayed quiet. Then a single clap, then two. Then the entire room on their feet applauding, not just for the performance, but for the man they had all underestimated. The following morning, the soundstage was quiet again, but not because work had stopped. Something different was happening. The set designer returned early, rearranging Bruce's dressing room. Photos from his career were printed and framed. Moonlighting, Pulp Fiction, The Sixth Sense, Die Hard. His face across decades, grinning, brooding, fighting, surviving. Someone brought in an old vinyl player and queued up Frank Sinatra. That's Life, played softly in the background. It wasn't just nostalgia, it was apology. The young actress, the one who once avoided eye contact after he flubbed lines, now waited at the entrance. She carried a note in her pocket she'd written and rewritten a dozen times. When Bruce arrived later that day, not to work but just to visit, she stepped forward. "Mr. Willis," she said, voice trembling, "I didn't understand before, but I do now. I'm sorry, and thank you for everything you gave us." He smiled, gentle and worn. "Thank you, sweetheart. That means a lot." She watched him walk away, realizing she'd just spoken to a man who had shown more grace in silence than most ever do in speech. The director organized a tribute. He brought in a documentary crew to record memories, not of the illness, but of the man. Each person sat in front of a camera, describing their favorite Bruce moment, not from the screen, but from real life. One gaffer recalled the time Bruce helped him lift a broken lighting rig, even though he didn't have to. A costume designer remembered Bruce refusing a new leather jacket for a scene because the one she made looked more like something his character would actually wear. Even the assistant, who once joked about his memory loss, now cried through her story of how Bruce asked about her dog by name weeks after she mentioned it once. These weren't stories of a fading star. They were stories of a man who paid attention, who cared. By the end of the week, the studio greenlit the documentary. They titled it Still Bruce. At home, Bruce spent more time with his family. Emma shared quiet moments on social media, a video of Bruce dancing in the kitchen with their daughter, another of him smiling at a sunset. The world began to understand what the crew had come to realize. He wasn't disappearing. He was being remembered differently. The studio decided not to finish the film without him. Instead, they compiled his footage into a short film, raw, unfinished, and full of heart. They released it online with no fanfare. Within days, it went viral. Millions watched Bruce forget lines, pause too long, look lost, then fight through it scene after scene, not polished, not perfect, but profoundly human. And in the comments, something beautiful happened. No jokes, no cruelty, just love. People wrote about growing up with his movies, about fathers who quoted Die Hard, about how they never realized how much they cared until now, and about how they saw themselves, or their parents, their loved ones, in his struggle. One comment stood out, pinned to the top by the studio itself. "He gave us his strength for decades. The least we can do now is return some of it." Months later, the lights dimmed in a packed auditorium in Los Angeles. It wasn't a film premiere, it was a tribute. Actors, directors, crew members, young and old, filled the velvet seats, faces lit by candlelight flickering from the stage. Bruce sat in the front row, Emma's hand in his. The screen displayed no explosions, no guns, just moments, glimpses from a life spent in front of and behind the camera. Bruce laughing behind the scenes with Samuel L. Jackson. Bruce playing harmonica at a rap party in 1995. Bruce kneeling to tie his daughter's shoe between takes. The audience was quiet. Then Emma stepped onto the stage. "He's forgetting," she said gently, "but we're not." She paused, glancing down at Bruce, who smiled up at her with a softness that made half the room tear up instantly. "For decades," she continued, "Bruce showed up for us, for the studios, the scripts, the audience. But behind the legend was a man who loved, who listened, who tried, even when it got hard." She looked out at the crowd, and when we all failed to see what was happening, he still gave us what little he had left. There was a beat of silence, then applause. Backstage, a young actor approached Bruce nervously. He had starred in the studio's latest blockbuster, a role once considered the new John McClane. "I just wanted to say, you're the reason I got into acting," the young man said, "and I hope someday someone will talk about me the way they talk about you now." Bruce reached out, placed a hand on the young man's shoulder, and simply nodded. It was enough. Later that evening, Bruce sat with Greg, the veteran grip, on a bench outside the theater. "You ever think they'll forget again?" Bruce asked, his voice slower now, like his mind was working through water. Greg shook his head. "Not a chance. Not after this. You didn't just make movies, Bruce. You made memories, the kind that don't fade." Bruce looked up at the stars. "Good," he said softly. "Because I don't always remember them, but I know they mattered." Greg swallowed hard. "They did, man. They still do." In the weeks that followed, the short film Still Bruce was nominated for a humanitarian award, not for its production, but for its impact. And Bruce, though stepping out of the spotlight, remained in the hearts of millions. He was no longer mocked, no longer misunderstood. He was honored, as a man, as a fighter, as a legend, not for what he used to be, but for what he still was, present, real, loved. So if you grew up with his films, if you've ever been moved by his characters, if you now see him in a new light, click subscribe and join the people keeping his memory alive while he's still here to feel it. And leave a comment below. Let him hear your voice like he gave us his for decades.